Stand up! Vanguard!
What's up, Cardfighters? Clark here from Vanguard Central. I'm coming at you with a Vanguard meta update. Considering this is after Fighters Collection and before Set 7, a lot of new clans did get revamped with some good G-Guards if you guys didn't see our latest discussion. But this is a list that we have compiled for the top tier clans in the meta, the tier 2s, tier 3s, and the lowest tier clans. So let's get to the definition of what is a top tier clan. So a top tier deck that is defined by Vanguard Central is a decker clan that performs at the highest level with efficiency and high power output. So your tier 1 has your highest power output, the high consistency, and an efficient deck engine that allows them to get the pieces they need whenever they need it. Tier 2 is medium consistency, but they do deal a lot of damage, but they need their pieces to be successful. Tier 3 is low consistency. They lack a good deck engine and they're still missing pieces to just sneak into tier 2. And tier 4 is they're missing just everything. They're missing the metagame development or even to be considered viable. So you're going to see which decker clans fall into these 4 categories. So getting started with tier 1, we have Royal Paladin, Angel Feather, Granblue, Shadow Paladin, Link Joker, Aqua Force, and Gear Chronicle. So if you see on the screen, there's a couple of the variants of the decks that have been topping or have topped consistently in the past few months. So especially with the expanded G zone, these decks will only get better. So going over a couple of the decks that have been topping, I think Blaster is a really good and viable deck for Royal Paladin right now. They're extremely versatile, they can adapt to any situation, and they don't really auto-lose to anything, maybe except Chaos. But they're a little inconsistent because they do have a low amount of 3s, and they need the correct pieces to work, like MOB and Bleu just to fill Soul, especially going throughout the game. And then Vanguard, they're very, very powerful and extremely efficient throughout the game, and they can mow people down with Regalier as their first. But they lose the 4 grade 3 set strategy because of Sea Breeze, and it's easy to punish now. They're still very strong, but they force you to run Guarantee now, which can reduce the effectiveness of the deck until the Daigo Legend set comes out. Especially with the expanded G zone for Royal Paladin, I think what I'm most scared for is the thought of them having 4 Ultimiles that they can go into so they can tutor their 2s at any time that they need. I mean, same blows, whatever, as long as you have a PG, but the fact that Ultimile is available to them more than once is really good for Royals. So now we're going to talk about Angel Feather. The main 2 decks that you see for this clan is Nociel and Gavriel. The other is a combination of both, which is really effective if you didn't see that it did top at California Team League. But a little bit about Nociel is that the hand power is pretty amazing through the deck, and the speed of the deck is quite unmatched once you go to 3 and you're getting all those Nociels into your damage zone. They have strong defense and really good multi-attack, so they have a really good advantage engine. But it is also kind of luck-based, the type of deck that doesn't go off or it doesn't, and I don't think Seabreeze affects it since the main plan wasn't to gain a lot of advantage at the Grade 2 game anyways. And then with Gavriel and Nociel combined, you get the best of both worlds. There's a little bit of options of where you want to go into the defensive Gavriel or use Nociel to speed up and gain more advantage, but the defensive capabilities are very good in both. They're not as offensive as a pure Nociel deck, and they can't obtain cards in the hand as easily, but they do have a lack of hand power and they can be rushed down in the early game. Crazy to think that Angels is only going to get better as once set 7 comes out and how good they are now, especially that Refrost is still at 4 in America. But if they do get hit, they won't be quite as scary because they're taking away that infinite engine loop. But Angels is still really good. Defensive capabilities and the ability to heal at any time is very, very good. Next, we have Link Joker, as Chaos Breaker, Messiah, or a Freeze Ray Messiah builds are the main competitive decks for this clan. It straight up shuts down a lot of decks on the tier 1 list and is really hard to play around at times. The deck has a lot of consistency with cards like Colony Maker and Photon, and the 16G zone just means that you can lock an opponent out forever with access to 4 big crunches now than before. The weaknesses of Link Joker is that it's really weak to rush-oriented decks and can auto-lose to Ezel and has a really hard time keeping up with brawlers. It also can have a hard time with Vanguard-oriented clans like Thingsaver or the Metalborg Break Ride. Otherwise, CBD and Messiah are very consistent and are very viable decks in our meta. Next, we move on to Granblue. So the two main decks you see for them is Seven Seas and Night Rose. Both decks are super versatile and everything is super efficient. It can play around any deck with its efficiency and hollow mechanic to keep their rears safe. Once it's going, it can out-advantage almost any deck because of their recyclability and the fact that you have access to Cutlass, Cannoneer, anything that you need, is just in your drop zone, and that drop zone is obviously going to be huge. The cons is that Night Rose version has to worry about decking out and doesn't have Slash Shades, which are really effective in the Seven Seas deck, and they are a bit slower. And so, since they are slow, you can be rushed down by like an Aqua Force deck or any decks that really do well in aggro settings. But otherwise, Granblue is very good. Seven Seas has a very good advantage engine with turn 2 Cutlass or the multi-attacks with Slash Shades, and having access to Night Rose in that deck too is really good. The next clan we're going to talk about is Shadow Paladin. So my favorite build of Shadows is Revengers. Considering they're still as efficient as ever, they have the ability to play around control decks like CBD or even, Brawlers. They're very consistent and powerful, especially with the Mordred and Abyss build, but Raging Form is very fun to play as well. The cons is that it hasn't gotten any stronger, really, and due to the lack of support with these crappy G-Guards that we just got, it has issues defending against really good and high attacking decks. So, such as Angel Feathers or even Aqua Force, it gives them a lot of trouble. The other build for Shadows is Diablo. It kind of just cheeses people and forces them to overcommit with the retiring capabilities that deck has, but it doesn't have a strong advantage engine, and most of the advantage goes into whittling down your opponent's hand. Shadow Stride Zone is still very efficient, especially when you can have access to GB2 early if you G-Guard, and then you can Diablo. So games can end quicker with Shadows. It just depends how you play. If you want to try and rush early, or if you want to take games into the later game. The next clan we're talking about is Aqua Force. So the main build that is tier 1 is Thavas. They have really good push plays with Lambros and the Thavas Stride. They have more draw power than you think because of Melania, basically. And Skyros lets them play around control as long as you ride them like during late game, or it shuts down decks like Vanquisher or even CBD, gives them a hard time. The access to aggro and control for Thavas is really what sets it apart from Blue Wave or Maelstrom. Some of the cons of Thavas is that it is combo reliant, so you do need the correct pieces, and it's traditionally weak to control. So if they don't get Skyros, nothing is changed. So the deck basically gets shut down as long as one or two rear guards are locked. Having access to the new G Guardians, if you do first turn Lambros, basically, you can end the game right there as long as the pieces are in your hand. But the deck is still very deadly, especially with all that mixture of aggro and control. And last but not least, to round about tier 1 would be Gear Chronicle, of course, and the build right now is Chronojet. So the deck has everything. It has draw, restand, Garter's Trick, and multi-attack, especially with Time Leap. And it'll only get better, of course, once Set 7 comes out with the new Time Leap, but Chronofang is obviously its own deck. Next stage is what keeps it in tier 1 due to the, just being one CB, and now you can end the game as soon as you get to your second stride. The cons of Gear Chronicle is that it is a little slow, so they do need to stride first in order to really gain advantage. You're usually seeing the same combos all the time, so you do know how to save shield, but otherwise, with the whole new Time Leap shenanigans, Gears is very good and viable. Moving on to tier 2, we have Dimension Police, Kagero, Gold Paladin, Novo Grappler, Bermuda Triangle, Great Nature, Narukami, and Neo Nectar. Well, Neo Nectar is kind of floating in 2.5, but they are still very good. Some of the pros about D-Police is Laurel is a thing, and you can play 4 in America, obviously. You can win without Laurel, but even if you don't get Laurel when you're playing with DP, your opponent has to play as if you do have it in hand. By far, OTK is the best version due to the advantage of Die Earth and almost the unbeatable kill turn due to Break Ride Legion. Cons about the deck: Cosmic gets PG, D-Robos are very inconsistent, and Metalborgs usually only have one big turn and can be G-guarded. That's why a little bit of the mixture of OTK is the best. The next clan is Kagero, main build being Overlord. If we don't remember that in set 1, Overlord was reigning supreme during that time. But otherwise, it's a very efficient, good at controlling the field and their own counterblast. Otherwise, your opponent has to play around the deck. Cons about the deck is that the control is kind of weak right now, and the cross specifically is a bit on the slow side. Otherwise, once set 7, you'll probably see a jump in Kagero, especially with the Denial Griffin and the new G-Guard that completely destroys back row. But otherwise, Kagero is one of the clans that will be moving up in the tier list. The next clan on the list is Golds. So Ezel by far destroys Link Joker, and it has a lot of good late game pushes. Bluish Flame mainly is about the early game power and the guard restrict with Glare later on in the game. Gurguit has really high defensive capabilities with Slamey and with its GB2. Otherwise, Gurguit is only going to get better, especially since games are going into the late game and the new support that it will be gaining in set 7. Otherwise, the cons of Gold Paladin is that Ezel is so slow and they get rushed down, which makes it hard for them to keep what they need in their hand. Bluish is not good at drawing, and their rush hurts them a lot. Not getting Bruno makes the Explosion Blue almost useless as a finisher because now it can be G-guarded. And Gurguit is still pretty consistent. The con maybe would be that they could be rushed down, of course, since they are GB reliant. But going into later games, the deck is only going to get better. Next, we have Novo Grappler. The primary deck I'd like to focus on is Victor. It has really good multi-attack turns, and the power columns are like no other, especially since you have Sazanda and Rumble. And the fact that you can first stride the Victor Stride that came out in set 6 makes the deck pretty insane. And now the access to GB2 ensures that you have like a double restand basically for that deck. Otherwise, the cons of the deck is need to draw to the right pieces. Easier than before, but still it's pretty tough. And it hurts when it goes up against control, like CBD, Brawlers, anything that can destroy their field is really detrimental to Nova Grapplers. The next clan we're talking about is Bermuda. The multi-attacks and draw engine are very strong for them. The two variants of the deck that are very good are Duos and Prism, since they have more advantage than Loris. And Loris obviously relies on Stride Break. The cons about Bermuda as a whole is consistency issues because they always need the right pieces in order to maintain any sort of advantage. And Loris is surprisingly weak to control since you need field for her GB1. Otherwise, we're just waiting for future support from the Clan Booster set that's coming out in July to see if Bermuda will rise in the tiers or drop. The next clan we're looking at is Great Nature. Chatnor and Tesserfox remain the best version of the build so far. The G-Guards allow you to slow the game down and tempo it to how you like, so eventually they can stack triggers and get really good advantage throughout the game. The Chatnor and Leopold Reverse build can get guarded easier, especially after the release of G-Guards, and after that it has no steam. The Chatnor and Tesserfox version is weak to rush, and it also needs combo pieces so that can hurt. The weakest version of Grey Nature is the Big Belly build, as it relies on rearguards to be on the field, and the counterblast heavy mechanics of Magnamar, Big Belly, and Crayon Tiger, they just don't really mix well together. So we'll just have to wait and see what they get in the technical booster that comes out. Next in Tier 2 we have Narukami. All versions of Narukami are very good, as Vanquisher, Kaiser, and Brawler have devastating field control, and can swing with very big power columns later in the game. Vanquisher is probably the best version of Narukami right now, due to the Vanquisher stride not needing to kill anything, and eventually, when they have 7 units in the bind zone, it's already more powerful than Conquest. Narukami is one of the best anti-meta clans, as they can punish your opponents for playing conservatively and just devastate the field. One of the main weaknesses of Narukami is that they have weak hand power, so as long as you keep rebuilding your field and pressuring them, they will lose since they rely on destroying the field so they can plus, or they don't have to guard as much throughout the game. This clan in tier 2 is Neo Nectar. The main build for Neo Nectar is Asha with some Bloom support, as Primavera and Ranunculus make the power numbers and columns ridiculous, especially if you're running stands within the deck. The rest of the clan as a whole is pretty weak, as Musketeers has disappeared from competitive play. Outside of Asha builds, nothing is really viable unless you're playing Blue, but even then, it's a little bit harder. Primavera is the best stride by far, as making the really big columns that it needs. Neonectar as a whole is really weak to control, as you can see in tiers 1 and 2 that some of the decks have good elements of control that Asha just can't compete with because they can't regenerate the board that they need. Onto tier 3, we have Tachikaze, Spike Brothers, Dark Irregulars, Oracle Think Tank, Megacolony, and Pale Moon. Starting off with tier 3, we have Tachikaze and Ancient Dragons as the main builds of the deck, as the multi-attacks are very strong, and Dogma is probably one of the best restanders in the game due to the Pentadrive, of course. What's about Tachikaze right now is that it is combo dependent, and the field presence of the deck is very lacking. So it is very weak to control, as it needs to keep units on the board to really do any of its big power pushes. Ancient Dragon loses steam, especially later on into the game, and Gaia is just slow right now. Next, we have Spike Brothers in Tier 3, as the multi-attack turns are obviously very brutal in Rising Nova and the Break Ride Legion. Slower games allow them to set up easier, and the final turns become even more deadly. The main con about Spike Brothers is that they have no hand advantage and no hand generating system. So, in other words, most of their cards go into the soul to pull off more skills or get other units, and outside of Mecha Trainer grabbing whatever you want, you need to run an abundant amount of draws in order to get into the pieces you need. So, this inconsistency makes him a lot easier to play around and a lot easier to deal with. Next, we have Dark Irregular. Soul charging is a lot easier than it used to be, as cards like Barmaid Grace and the Stride Break Shaharlet allow it to be a lot easier and more consistent. Hitting 15 soul is a lot more relevant than it used to be, as Gilderai is one of the best finishers in the game. One of the main cons of Dark Irregular is that you just have to wait until their big Vanguard attacking turn, and their rear guards become pretty irrelevant in the late game, unless they're playing something like Amon, where they can just put Barmaid Grace's skill onto their rear guard. Otherwise, outside of Gilderai and a really fat Vanguard, they have nothing that's really going for them. But we see what Set 7 brings to Dark Irregular as a whole. They could remain as a really high tier 3 or eventually sneak into tier 2. The next clan we have is OTT. They have really great draw power. Silent Tom is one of the best rear guards in the game, and longer games means that their selective drawing is truly in effect, as you see triggers come up in late games. The main OTT deck you see in competitive play is still the Susanoo Coco build, as it is the most consistent out of all the builds for OTT. Cons of OTT is that since games are taking a lot longer, especially with the introduction of G Guardians, it means decking out is more of a possibility. And since many decks can hit with really high offensive numbers, the draws tend to turn into defense, and that eventually can't keep you in the game for much longer. Next, we have Megacolony, as stunning the Vanguard is still one of the more powerful mechanics within the game. They also got some support in set 4 that allows their rear guards to do more things, so they're not as Vanguard oriented as they used to be. The cons of Megacolony is that they're still very weak with a lack of a better draw engine, and they tend to lose to control decks such as CBD, Brawlers, or anything that can really mess up their field, so they can't use Machining Destroyer. And they still lose to opponents when they draw threes, even if it's easier to punish people who hoard those threes. The main decks that you see for Megacolony is basically machining, as it is a lot better than Darkface at the moment. So we have to wait and see what they get in the technical booster, if they'll rise in the ranks. But otherwise, they're still a very decent clan. Last in tier 3, we have Pale Moon, as Harry is the main competitive deck for this clan. Nightmare Doll is still really good as well, as it is more viable than Silverthorn and Beast Tamer. The pros about Pale Moon is that they can generally generate field from nowhere, and their hand power is pretty decent. In the Harry build, the stride power turns are really good, and they actually have really good columns. Nightmare Doll can push for games once they're at limit break with that infinite loop. Otherwise, the cons about Pale Moon is that the random soul charging and combo nature makes them inconsistent, and they just lack a better Vanguard in most of the decks, such as Harry with not another grade 3 that can really do much, and Nightmare Doll having to ride Catherine to really generate any sort of advantage. Lastly, we have Tier 4 with 3 clans, Genesis, Murakumo, and Nubatama. All 3 clans have just lacked a lot of support and basically are very inconsistent within our meta, and that's what grants them their Tier 4 entrance. Starting off with Genesis, their only main units that are really good is Vanagandar, as he can stack triggers, and Yggdrasil is really hard to block when it is comboed with the break ride. Otherwise, there's almost no positives into their finishers are easier, if not easy to block now, especially with the introduction of G-Guardians, and nothing they do is really powerful enough to really keep up with most of the decks within our meta. Next we have Murakumo. The only really good thing Murakumo does is multi-attack, as the deck is able to grab the copies of other cards and then power up from there. Otherwise, the con is that it needs copies in the deck, and that makes it very inconsistent as games get longer. The deck can improve with the Fighters Collection Stride a lot, but it can't multi-attack as well as Neo Nectar, Aqua Force, or even Gear Chronicle. Last but not least, we have Nubatama rounding out our tier 4. Basically, the only pro they have is having your opponent lose cards in their hand. Otherwise, nothing else is really relevant to them. Their best advantage of nuking hand to make guarding hard is really hurt by G Guardians, so they lost their main gimmick. After Image is a neat way to play around certain decks, but lack of hand power makes them easy to kill as well. Nui is your best bet at a competitive build. Otherwise, anything outside of that build is very lackluster. Hope you all enjoyed the Vanguard meta talk after Fighters 2016. A lot of clans will shift once set 7 is around, so we'll just have to wait and see what kind of effect they have on the meta. This list was compiled between Ryan, Chris, and I as we talked to multiple groups of friends and competitive Vanguard players out there. Otherwise, if you have any questions or comments, just put them down in the comment section below. Vanguard Central out.